Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and today is a very special day. I'd like to wish a very happy birthday to Delilah, my wonderful, beautiful partner, to whom I owe so much of my happiness, and at her request, I'll be covering a theme near and dear to her heart, Melodious. Premiering in the August 2014 core set, Duelist Alliance, this group of choir kids was piloted by Zuzu Boyle in Arc V, and while it was oft overshadowed by the likes of Shaddolls, Teller Knights, and Burning Abyss, the prim and proper facade of these powerful prima donnas hid a truly formidable fusion strategy. By leveraging some supremely sonorous strategies, you could lock down the battlefield and pick apart even the hardiest of monsters before you even reached the second stanza. And I speak from experience because this was one of the first decks Delilah used when we both used to play in locals, and I've gotta say, beating the Aria Elegy setup was rough. But enough strolling down memory lane, let's review our sheet music to make sure everything's in order, see how these musical maidens harmonize, then see if there are any voices we can add to round out the opera. It's time to make some music with Melodious. So what's the deal with Melodious? Well, they're a series of light attribute fairy type monsters with a penchant for fusion summoning. A lot of their effects are also only active when special summoned, so it's a good idea to run as many cards as possible that can facilitate that. Let's take it from the top with Score the Melodious Diva, a level 2 monster with 200 attack and defense, and during damage calculation in either player's turn, if a Melodious monster you control battles an opponent's monster, you can send this card from your hand to the grave to change that opponent's monster's attack and defense to 0 until the end of the turn. Now, in general, Honest is going to be a more powerful option, as you can flex it in a way that deals a lot more damage. But Score is on theme, and still gets the job of beating your opponent's monsters by battle all done. In fact, if you're squaring off against a monster that can't be destroyed by battle, this could actually result in more damage, since the stat reduction lasts until the end of the turn. So any other tiny critters you have can easily squeeze through for some more damage to settle the score. Sonata, the Melodious Diva, is a level 3 monster with 1200 attack and 1000 defense, and if you control a Melodious monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And while this card is special summoned, all fairy monsters you control gain 500 attack and defense, a not insignificant boost. This puts them at 1700 by themselves, and plays well with any other copies of Sonata you have, not only because the boosts stack, but also since the special summon isn't once per turn. And if you get 3 special summon Sonatas onto the field, then your opponent's field will be no treble at all. Aria, the Melodious Diva, is a level 4 monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense. And while this special summoned card is on the field, all your Melodious monsters can't be targeted by card effects, nor can they be destroyed by battle, meaning non-targeting removal is the only way to get them off the field. Which Phoenix Enforcer still does, but means they can't be sniped by Dracoback. Aha! But you might be noticing that there's no way printed on Aria to special summon them, so you'll have to rely on a supplementary effect to handle this. Whether you summon them from the hand with Valhalla, Hall of the Fallen, or summon them back from the grave with something like Back to the Front. Either way, once you've established Aria on board, you'll know you have something special. Cannon, the Melodious Diva, is a level 4 monster with 1400 attack and 2000 defense, and like Sonata, if you control a Melodious monster, you can special summon Cannon from your hand. And once per turn, you can target a Melodious monster you control and change its battle position. This is helpful if you're stuck with a revival effect that summons in a particular position, Call of the Haunted for example, and you'd rather that monster be in defense position so your opponent can't punch through him for extra damage. But outside that very specific niche, this effect isn't really useful. However, don't discount it quite yet, because the power of a free level 4 summon can't be understated, as this helps make rank 4 Xyz monsters, as well as helping you to access Link monsters, both generic and on theme. More about that in a bit. For now though, it's enough to know that this monster is a great addition to the theme's canon. Opera, the Melodious Diva, is a level 4 monster with a whopping 2300 attack and 1000 defense that can't attack the turn it's normal summoned or flipped face up. So you could say its benefit for being special summoned is that it can attack. And if this card is sent to the grave as fusion material for a fusion summon, you can activate an effect that keeps your Melodious monsters you control from being destroyed by battle or card effect for the rest of the turn, making for a great stopgap if you haven't set up Aria and Elegy yet. This also means Opera has some synergy with Skill Drain, as it can also attack the turn it's normal summoned if its effects are negated. But the best part is that you get to beat up powerful dragons and mighty magicians with a member of the magical Do-Re-Mi crew. What could be better than that? Serenade, the Melodious Diva, is a level 4 monster with 400 attack and 1900 defense that can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of any fairy monster, which will be very useful in just a bit, as we do have some very large-sized Melodious that this can help with. And if this card is special summoned to your side of the field, you can normal summon a Melodious monster during your main phase of this turn, in addition to your normal summoner set. Fun fact, did you know that since it gifts the extra normal summon after it's been special summoned and doesn't start a chain, any effect negation pointed at Serenade after this point won't affect that summon? It's like Ritual Beast Tamer Elder. The only way to stop this is if there's already continuous effect negation on the field, like with skill drain, or if the summon is negated outright, because once you have the extra normal summon, it's just kind of yours. There's no source that can be negated to stop that. But back to practical usage, Serenade can help you get those big lyrical ladies on the board quickly, or normal summon an accompanying monster for more extra deck shenanigans. Either way, these effects are music to my ears. Solo, the Melodious Songstress, is a level 4 monster with 1600 attack and 1000 defense, and if your opponent controls a monster and you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. And when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the grave, you can special summon a Melodious monster from your deck, except another copy of itself. This is a fantastic going second card, as you can either use Solo to extend your plays, or smash into a bigger monster to replace it with a new Melodious, who will have their effects active by nature of being special summoned. So while it can handle setting you up by itself, this monster is anything but a solo act. Soprano, the Melodious Songstress, is a level 4 monster with 1400 attack and defense, and if this card is special summoned, you can target a Melodious monster in your grave and add it to your hand, except a copy of itself. And once per turn, you can fusion summon a Melodious monster from your extra deck, using monsters you control as fusion material, including this card. So you can't use material in hand, which is a bit of a bummer, but I suppose they wanted you to focus on the special summoning aspect of your individual monsters. And thankfully, if you get back a copy of Sonata or Cannon, they can just special summon themselves so you don't have to worry about it. So really, the limitations of the deck are all about perspective. It might look like it's saying Sopran no to fusion summoning, when really, it helps you say Sopran yes. Tam Tam, the Melodious Diva, is a level 4 monster with 1000 attack and 2000 defense. If this card is special summoned while you control a Melodious monster, you can add a polymerization from your deck to your hand. And if this card is sent to the grave as fusion material for a fusion summon, you can target a Melodious monster you control, it loses 500 attack, and if it does, inflict 500 points of damage to your opponent. So it's like you're getting some of that damage ahead of schedule without having to worry about how the battle phase goes. It also makes that monster less viable in combat, but believe me, we've got a Melodious that combos very well with this. And of course, being able to recycle or search a polymerization is huge, giving you much more flexibility with your fusion summoning while drumming up more support. Elegy, the Melodious Diva, is a level 5 monster with 2000 attack and 1200 defense, and while on the field, special summoned Melodious monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects, and if this card was special summoned, all fairy monsters you control gain 300 attack while Elegy is on the field. Like Aria, you'll need to find a way to get this onto the field, but once you do, your on-theme monsters will be immune to one of the most prevalent forms of removal in the game, and when combined with Aria, your opponent's going to need to find non-targeting and non-destruction removal to get past your defenses. Now, unfortunately, there's more ways to do that now than there ever has been. The Kaiju saw to that, but it's still very specific, and if you can keep some answers to those effects at the ready, the only person that's going to need an Elegy is your opponent. Chopina, the Melodious Maestra, is a level 7 monster with 2300 attack and 1700 defense, and once per turn they can target a light fairy monster in your grave and add it to your hand. However, you can't activate non-light monster effects during the turn you activate this effect, before or after. This can limit the flexibility of generic Link monsters, as basically all the best nightmares don't fit that description, but because it only stops non-light effects, you can still use off-theme cards like Ghost Ogre and Nibiru. And with Honest and Score being cards that exist, Chopina surprisingly becomes one of the most threatening monsters in the battle phase for its ability to let you win any fight by recycling these very powerful hand traps, not to mention its ability to recover cards from other powerful light fairy themes. So with a little work Chopina, you can string together some gnarly combos. Mozarta, the Melodious Maestra, is a level 8 monster with 2600 attack and 2000 defense, and once per turn you can special summon a Light Fairy monster from your hand, but you can't special summon other monsters the turn you activate this effect, except light monsters. Like Shapina, this does get in the way of your deck building, but does end up getting your Melodious monsters online fairly quickly, as well as bringing to bear heavy hitters like Archlord Christia and Splendid Venus. But unfortunately, its utility is a lot less broad than Shapina. Turns out a lot of really good light fairies also have to be special summoned in very specific ways. But it's still an incredible enabler for our Melodious monsters, and can even special summon other copies of Mozarta to string together a ton of monster summons to really compose a winning field. Now, before we move on to the extra deck monsters, we need to touch on a non-Melodious card that's a pretty wild inclusion. Crystal Rose is a level 2 light rock monster with 500 attack and defense, and once per turn you can send a Gem Knight or Melodious monster from your hand or deck to the grave, and if you do, this card's name becomes the sent monster's name until the end phase. And if this card is in the grave, you can banish a fusion monster from your grave to special summon this card in defense position. Now, why do Melodious and Gem Knight have a card that connects the two? Does this mean that Melodious are part of the wide, sweeping dual terminal storyline? No. Not at all. It's actually just a funny quirk of Arc V introducing a trio of characters who all use dual terminal archetypes, and the one that used Gem Knights, Julia Crystal, formed a rivalry with Zuzu, and originally the card belonged to Julia, but given to Zuzu after the Gem Knight player's defeat because, in Julia's words, if they were going to lose, it was only going to be to someone who was going to win the whole tournament. Now, mechanically, this is a much stronger card in Gem Knights. It's already a rock for the purposes of fusion summoning, and sending Gem Knight Lazuli to grave is basically a +1. In Melodious, this can help set up more specific fusion material. Some of them do require Melodious Maestras, while giving you a free summon to work with on later turns, as well as doing some minor graveyard setup. And if that wasn't enough, the recently announced Power of the Element set has another version of this, Brilliant Rose, another level 2 light rock monster with 500 attack and defense, and this time it's got some text that always treats it as a Gem Knight card. However, it still remains true to its roots, letting you discard a Gem Knight or Melodious card to special summon this card from your hand. And once per turn, you can send a Gem Knight or Melodious monster from your extra deck, specifically, to the grave, but this time is cost. And on resolution, Brilliant Rose's name, type, and attribute become the sent monster's name, type, and attribute until the end phase. I would not be surprised if this was here to help put together Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli FTKs, but in Melodious, it actually doesn't accomplish much more than Crystal Rose does. If you didn't want to run the main deck Maestras, this lets you send the Fusion Maestra instead, and the discard could help with setting up graveyard special summons, but it doesn't have the same recursion as Crystal Rose. But now that you have Brilliant Rose, you now have a bouquet of options to choose from. Alright, now it's time for our fusions. Schuberta, the Melodious Maestra, is a level 6 fusion monster with 2400 attack and 2000 defense, requiring any 2 Melodious monsters as material. And during either player's turn, as a quick effect, you can target up to 3 cards in any graveyards, banish them, and if you do, this card gains 200 attack for each, permanently. But this effect can only be used once while this card is face up on the field. So you have a really savage DD Crow that takes your Monarch attack stat and queen sizes it. And with such generic fusion material, basically any fusion effect can get Schuberta online. And while only being able to use the effect once is kinda restrictive, it plays into the theme's strengths of reviving your monsters. You can link off Schuberta, then revive it to get another round of banishing. And if you can keep doing this, then you can bet your opponent's grave is gonna look spick and span all throughout the game. I do not envy the Eldritch player that has to deal with this. Bloom Diva, the Melodious Choir, is a level 6 fusion monster with 1000 attack and 2000 defense, requiring a Melodious Maestra and any Melodious monster as material. Bloom Diva can't be destroyed by battle or card effect, and you take no damage from battles involving this card. And if this card battles a special summoned monster after damage calculation, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to the difference between the original attack of that opponent's monster and this card, and if you do, destroy that opponent's monster. So it's kind of like the damage reflection Amazona Swordswoman deals, and this is why Tam Tam makes such a good material for this summon. By reducing Bloom's attack, you're counterintuitively dealing more damage. In fact, being paired with Sonata and Elegy is actually a non-bow, which I find hilarious. It also comes packaged with amazing protections, but you'll want to summon Arya to stave off targeting as well. They're an incredibly powerful combatant, but raw help you if you end up opposite the Flunderee's opponent. Turns out fighting a deck that doesn't special summon with this card is impossible. Bloom Prima, the Melodious Choir, is a level 7 fusion monster with 1900 attack and 2000 defense, requiring a Melodious Maestra and one or more Melodious monsters as material. Prima gains 300 attack for each fusion material used for it, so it'll hit the board with at least 2500 attack, getting bigger the more you invest into it, can make a second attack during each battle phase, and if this fusion summoned card is sent to the grave, you can target a Melodious monster in your grave and add it to your hand. Bloom Prima makes for a great game ender, as the double attacks can be direct attacks, so we're threatening 5000 points of damage on an open board at least, because none of that factors in the kinds of bonuses you can accrue when being paired with Elegy and Sonata. And being able to grab a monster back to recoup some of those costs isn't half bad either, and your opponent will certainly have to take note of it. Now it's time for that Link monster. Bloom Harmonist, the Melodious Composer, is a Link 2 monster with 1000 attack, requiring 2 fairy monsters as material. If this card is Link summoned, you can discard a card to special summon 2 Melodious monsters with different levels from your deck to your zones this card points to in defense position, but you can't special summon monsters the turn you activate this effect except Melodious monsters. Oh, well. There goes a lot of the synergies I was talking about earlier. Why didn't Hulk get this level of scrutiny? Anyway, if a Melodious monster this card points to attacks, your opponent can't activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step. Now, thankfully, this Bloom isn't all doom and gloom. You can summon monsters like Arya and Elegy to get their protections online, but since the bonus Armades effect only works on the Melodious it points to, you might want to consider stepping stone monsters you don't mind using as material. Tam Tam will get you the free polymerization, or you can summon Soprano to fusion summon by itself and refund you a card, which will guarantee you gain access to that fusion monster. And if you pair that summon with a Shapina or Mozarta, you can activate their effects before going into Bloom Diva or Prima, helping all of your monsters work in harmony. Alright, now it's time for the spells and traps. First Movement Solo is a normal spell that you can only activate if you control no monsters. You special summon a level 4 or lower Melodious monster from your hand or deck, but you can't special summon any monsters the turn you activate this effect except Melodious monsters. This is one of the best ways to get Arya online if you already have your combos ready to go. And if not, it's a great way to find the pieces you need. And if your opponent wipes your board, it's a great way to recover. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your first movement, especially because in terms of this deck, its power is second only to 1. And that card is Ostinato, another normal spell that similarly you can only activate if you control no monsters. You fusion summon a Melodious fusion monster from your extra deck, using 2 monsters from your hand and or deck as fusion material. But during the end phase of this turn, destroy the monster fusion summoned by this effect, and if you do, if all the fusion material that was used for its summon are in your grave, you can special summon all of them. Now this card is a bomb, no two ways about it. By sending Arya and Elegy to the grave for Shuberta at the end of the turn, Shuberta gets sent to the grave, replaced by 2 special summon Melodiouses that keep your monsters from being destroyed or targeted. If you summon Bloom Prima, you get the 2 monsters you used back, and you get to recycle another one, and if you summon Bloom Diva, it sticks around because it can't be destroyed by card effects. Not to mention that this card does not put you under any kind of restriction, so out of all the cards you want to be seeing in your opening hand, or to get you back into the game, Ostinato is best if you want to get started riffing. Fortissimo is a continuous spell that, once per turn, lets you target a Melodious monster you control, and it gains 800 attack until your next standby phase, even if this card leaves the field. Note, this card does not function if Arya is on the field and has been special summoned, because it keeps your Melodious from being targeted. It does not distinguish between you or your opponent, though I suppose that's a small price to pay. You can also send this card to the grave to fusion summon a Melodious fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters you control as material. So it's a fusion spell if you need it, and a way to help your Melodious get over the top of your opponent's monster if not. Like, imagine adding this to Opera or Bloom Prima, absolutely wild stuff. We're gonna need some Fs in chat for this one. But not for us! Our last card is Melodious Illusion, a normal trap that targets a Melodious monster you control. This turn, that face-up monster you control can't be affected by your opponent's spell and trap effects, and it can make a second attack during each battle phase. I'm a fan of being able to avoid nasty spells and traps, and turning any Melodious into a mini Bloom Prima is pretty wild, but I think Bloom Prima kinda does the job pretty well on its own. I'd be more inclined to run more generic powerful trap cards than this if you have a choice, but if you've got space and you don't have money to run playsets of Infinite Impermanence or Ice Dragon's Prison, this is a surefire way to have your opponent seeing double. Okay, so that's all the Melodious cards, but what do we do with them? Well, I hazard to call this a mid-range deck, because while we can flip the stall switch pretty easily, I hesitate to say this deck has control elements. Rather, it's an aggro deck that can turtle up if need be, until the cards needed for victory come together, at which point our strength will grow and grow until it's reached a mighty crescendo. But what can we play to help them out? Well, if we wanted to play to the theme's strengths, we could play Defusion and Flash Fusion. Defusion will cash in our fusion monster to get the fusion material back, kind of like Ostinato. But because this is a quick play spell, we can use this during the battle phase to get a little extra chip damage in. Flash Fusion operates in reverse. It lets us fusion summon at quick effect speed during the battle phase for even more damage, but the monster is destroyed during the end phase, something Bloom Diva does not care about. If you can get your hands on them, powerful equalizers are the way to go. Since we want to use the battle phase, evenly matched isn't the best, but if you get your opponent down to only a few cards, you're in a great position to hold down the fort for a couple of turns to gather your win condition. Lightning Storm, Raigeki, and Harpy's Feather Duster also make for great inclusions, and while we're on the subject of a powerful one-of spell card, Monster Reborn is just a no-limits revival to get your effects online. For other ways of special summoning our Melodious monsters, the previously mentioned Valhalla, Hall of the Fallen, and Celestial Transformation are great ways to mobilize our monsters, especially Elegy, as its effect will keep it from being destroyed by Celestial Transformation. If you want help with tribute summoning our main deck Maestras, Condemned Dark Lord is a great way to do it, all while giving you some extra life points to work with. Since our deck is all fairies, this opens up the usage of the Heralds. Probably not the rituals, but Orange Light is a pretty spiffy hand trap that you can recycle with Shapina, and as a tuner, you can pair it with Score to make Arc Light, messing up a lot of grave setups and acting as an Omni-Negate. Not mentioning Pianissimo would probably be in bad form. It's not technically a Melodious card, but it is aesthetically, and I've gotta say, giving one of your monsters indestructibility for the turn at the cost of its attack points is a pretty good trade. I've seen worse. Other notable fairies include Athena. They can swap a fairy on field for one in grave, which will, by nature of the effect, trigger or make online any of the Melodious effects. Angel 07 is an incredible tribute monster that shuts off monster effects from both players, and Serenade can be both tributes for its summon. And if you're just a little short on damage and want to close out the game, why not try Trickstar, Candina, and Lycoris? Add Light Stage in there and you're liable to shave a couple thousand life points off your opponent without having to do anything. As for a silly tech pick, Sanctuary in the Sky is a great complement to our setups, preventing piercing battle damage from getting to our life points, as well as giving us access to a bunch of cool cards that surround it. With the release of the new Agent cards, we've got a swath of generic fairy support that can help you combat modern decks. Divine Punishment has been out for a while, but does require you to have a Sanctuary in the Sky on the field to activate this Omni-Negate, which is why it's so great we have so many new cards that act as Sanctuary in the Sky, that have actual good effects. Lost Sanctuary can search it or any of its associated spell and trap support, including Divine Punishment, and banishes fairies from your grave to negate monster effects, and is treated as Sanctuary in the Sky. And all those fairies you banish can be special summoned by Miraculous Descent. Chorus in the Sky can be used to grab back Melodious monsters from your grave, and you can link summon Celestial Nightlord Parshath to not only search any of these cards, but also helps to summon your Maestras from your hand as well. And that's all I've got to say about Melodious. They're loud, they're proud, and with sufficient support, they'll bury you in the ground. Fingers crossed that we'll see even more support for the theme and Power of the Elements. But for now, even if this venue hasn't turned heads in a while, they still have the music that makes my heart sing. First up is Refrain, the Melodious Songstress, a level 4 light fairy pendulum monster with 1600 attack and 800 defense with a scale of 1. As a pendulum spell, you can target a Melodious fusion monster you control to send a Melodious monster from your deck to the grave, and if you do, the targeted monster gains attack equal to the sent monster's level times 200 until the end of the turn. As a monster, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add a Melodious monster from your deck to your hand except a copy of this card. If a Melodious fusion monster is special summoned to the field while this card is face up in your extra deck, except during the damage step, you can place this card in your pendulum zone. Well, a Stratos on a pendulum monster. I'm sure that's going to go over very well. This'll do a great job of boosting your consistency and makes for great fusion material thanks to the fact that it'll just put itself back into the scales when you do so. Just be careful, it has to be face up in the extra deck to trigger this effect, so you cannot use this as material from the hand or as directly from the deck when playing Ostinato. And then you get to just boost up one of your fusions once per turn, because it's not like we have a big multi-attacker or anything, or heaven forbid use our graveyard. That would be absurd. This is a very powerful addition to the theme, but if you don't want to be punished, I would recommend that you refrain from overextending. Couplet, the Melodious Songstress, is a level 5 light fairy monster with 1200 attack and 2000 defense with a scale of 9. As a pendulum spell, it prevents you from pendulum summoning except for the summon of light monsters, which can't be negated, though that really shouldn't be a problem if you're playing the light deck. And if you don't control any face-up monsters, save for Melodious monsters, you can add a Melodious spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. As a monster, if this card is added to your hand except by drawing it for your normal draw, you can reveal this card to special summon a level 4 or lower Melodious monster from your hand or grave. It also shares an effect with Refrain, where you can place it into your pendulum zone from your face-up extra deck if a Melodious fusion monster is special summoned to your field. This is a very strong add off of Refrain if you have another Melodious to work with. Couplet can deploy that monster, gaining its bonus effects if applicable, while keeping Couplet in hand so you can scale it, where it'll get you a free card. Granted, we don't actually have a lot of Melodious spell or trap cards. That's not to say we don't have a lot of spells and traps that support Melodious, but very few are actually name-stamped, basically restricting us to the currently available Melodious Illusion and a card we'll get into in just a bit, which is admittedly gonna be super good. Basically, if you take Refrain and couple it with this, you'll have yourself a dynamic duet. Baka, the Melodious Maestra, is a level 7 light fairy fusion monster with 2500 attack and 1800 defense, requiring 2 Melodious monsters as material. While this fusion summoned card is on the field, your Melodious fusion monster's activated effects cannot be negated. If this card is special summoned, you can special summon a Melodious monster from your deck, and if this card is sent to the grave, you can target a Melodious monster in your grave, accept a copy of this card, and special summon it in defense position. Wow, this card is just pulling material out of its blouse, huh? So we fusion summon this, though notably this works on any special summon, and get a free Melodious out of our deck. This means we can get Aria, which provides effect targeting protection to our monsters plus battle destruction immunity, Soprano for more fusion summoning and monster recycling, or either of our main deck Maestras that are otherwise a pain to summon. And if this card is sent to the grave from anywhere, you get a free Melodious back from your grave. Easy peasy. All the while keeping your purple cards unaffected by negation while it's out, helping to push through your plays. It's an absolutely fantastic card, and you can bet I'll be Baka for more. Flowering Etoile, the Melodious Magnificat, is a level 8 light fairy fusion monster with 2800 attack and 1500 defense, requiring a Melodious Maestra and 2 Melodious monsters as material. As a quick effect, you can banish any number of Melodious monsters you control until the end phase, then you can return up to that many face-up cards your opponent controls to the hand. And if this face-up fusion summoned card and its owner's control leaves the field because of an opponent's card, you can special summon a Melodious monster from your deck or extra deck. So the more Melodious monsters you can deploy, the more cards you can compulse back to your opponent's hand at any given time. This may seem counterintuitive since many of our Melodious need to be special summoned to apply their bonus effects, but now it's time for rulings! If a monster is temporarily banished, characterized by a banishing effect that returns the monster to the field at a specified time, it remembers the way it was summoned initially. So you can temporarily banish an Aria as part of this, and it'll still keep your board nice and cozy. And if your opponent does manage to send this to the bin, you can get any Melodious from either of your decks onto the board. And let's just say that Bloom Diva is more than ready to throw down. And they're gonna need that protection. It's only a matter of time before Melodious and Sulfachord clash head to head to see who the real deck made of cute, musical-themed women are. Melodious Concerto is a normal spell card that fusion summons any fairy fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand, field, and or pendulum zone as material. And if any number of Melodious fusion monsters are sent to the grave while this card is in your grave, even during the damage step, you can place this card on the bottom of the deck, then draw a card. Oh yeah, this card is just bonkers. Let me run you through the playline here. If you have Refrain, you normal summon it, searching out Couplet. Regardless of if you have another Melodious to summon or not, proceed to scale Couplet, activating its effect to search Concerto. Activate it, fusing away the Refrain in the Monster Zone and the Couplet in the Pendulum Zone to make Baka, which can itself summon Soprano from the deck. This will allow you to scale both of your Pendulum monsters. Then you can use Refrain's effect, targeting Baka, to send Aria from deck to grave. Then, as long as you have any other Melodious monster, you can fuse it, Soprano, and Baka together to make Flowering Etoile. This will trigger Baka's effect to summon back a Melodious, summoning back the Soprano to use its soft once per turn fusion effect again, as well as recycling any of the Melodious sent to grave over the course of this combo. And because a Melodious fusion was sent to grave, you can put Concerto on the bottom of your deck to draw a card, not only setting it up to be searched by Couplet next turn, but also making it so you go +2 total in card economy. And from here, you're free to pendulum summon as many light monsters as you want to pair with Flowering Etoile, including the Aria that we sent to graveyard earlier in the turn to give everything targeting and battle destruction protection, because why not? This is staggeringly powerful, and if it was part of any other archetype, it would be going off the rails right now. Heck, as a branded player, I wish Branded Fusion could do half the stuff this card can. And, well, Quem and Cartesia are both light monsters, and that's when Nova thought of an idea. An awful idea. Nova got a wonderful, awful idea. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and it's time for Patron Week, where the Nebula Navigators of my Patreon come together and vote on what archetype I cover that month. And we're starting the year with an archetype that might be a bit of a sore subject to some duelists. Lunalights debuted in the May 2016 core set Shining Victories, and was piloted in the Arc V anime by Selena, the Fusion Dimension counterpart of Zuzu Boyle and Agent of Academia. Well, until she wasn't. And like their dimension of origin, Lunalights are very proficient with fusion summoning, though they do end up making great material for other summons as well. In fact, they're so good that they found themselves being splashed into a variety of other decks, from Zodiacs to Orchist. In fact, they might have been a bit too good, but we'll get into that in a bit. For now, let's catalog our cast so we know who's performing what, set the stage for their grand finale, then see what moves we can add to enhance the mystique of our majestic menagerie. It's time to grab the spotlight with Lunalight. So, what's the deal with Lunalights? Well, they're a series of dark, and some light, Beast Warrior monsters that excel at fusion summoning. But what do you do with those fusions? Well, as expected from a series of graceful, elegant dancers, they move around the battlefield before mercilessly smashing in your opponent's face with huge stats and multiple attacks. Let's go over the cast that makes this all possible, starting with our darks. Lunalight Black Sheep is a level 2 monster with 100 attack and 600 defense, and you can discard them to either add a Lunalight monster from your grave to your hand, except another copy of itself, or add a copy of Polymerization from your deck to your hand. And if sent to the grave as fusion material for any fusion summon, you can add to your hand a face-up Lunalight Pendulum monster from your extra deck, or any Lunalight in your grave. Yeah, we've got pendulums coming up, so be ready for that. It's nice to have a searcher for Polymerization, since the deck didn't have its own dedicated fusion spell for a long time. And as Fluffle players will tell you, having material that buys back your cards is great for your card economy and chain blocking. But it was actually its performance in Zodiacs that put Black Sheep on the map. At one time, Zodiacs ran this card because of its ability to search Fusion Substitute, which is always counted as Polymerization even while in the deck, which by extension made it searchable by Fire Formation Tenki because, you know, Beast Warrior. Zodiacs loved its level 4 material so much, and the rank 4 Xyz they could make, that they were hard summoning Elder Entity Norden, and Substitute had the added benefit of recycling that Norden while drawing a card. Now with Norden banned, Fusion Substitute has faded into the annals of history along with Black Sheep's splashability. But that just goes to show that, despite being the black sheep of the troop, they have no problem fitting in. Lunalight White Rabbit has 800 attack and defense, and when normal summoned, you can target a Lunalight monster in your grave, except another copy of itself, and special summon it in defense position. And once per turn, you can target spells and traps your opponent controls up to the number of Lunalight cards you control, and return them to the hand. And when doing this, make sure you count any Lunalight spells and traps you have on the field, because White Rabbit counts cards, not monsters. Now, a lot of our fusions can only be fielded by Fusion Summon, so you can't revive them on the cheap with Rabbit, but we have a lot of main deck options that will help you get there. And the ability to bounce your opponent's back row before proceeding with your game plan is a great way to make sure you push your plays through and get the jump on your opponent. Lunalight Purple Butterfly is a level 3 monster with 1000 attack and defense, and you can send them from your hand or field to the grave, then target a Lunalight monster you control, giving that target 1000 attack until the end of the turn. You can also banish this card from your grave to special summon a Lunalight monster from your hand. So Butterfly acts as an extender, getting more Lunalights out of your hand to continue your plays, and if you manage to give that 1000 attack to your big fusions, then all the better. Purple Butterfly helps you be extremely aggressive, casting aside any pretense of defense, which is appropriate since it's long gotten out of its cocoon, so no Metapod tactics here. Lunalight Blue Cat is a level 4 monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense, and if special summoned, you can target a Lunalight monster you control, except a copy of itself, and the target's attack becomes double its original attack until the end of the turn. And if Blue Cat is destroyed by battle or card effect while on the field, you can special summon a Lunalight from your deck. This does not preclude itself, so if destroyed, you can summon another copy of Blue Cat to trigger the effect. And considering how big our fusions are, doubling their attack is a game-ending maneuver. But good luck pulling this off when you need it. Every time I try to do this, my cat just climbs on some shelves. Lunalight Crimson Fox is a level 4 monster with 1800 attack and 600 defense, and if sent to the grave by a card effect, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and change its attack to 0 until the end of that turn. And when a card or effect is activated that targets any number of Lunalight monsters you control as a quick effect, you can banish this card from your grave to negate the activation, and if you do, each player gains 1000 life points. So you can insulate your board from targeting effects while also setting up your OTKs by taking attack off of your opponent's board. And while the life point gain for your opponent seems lame, we're going to be gaining a titanic amount of attack power over the course of a combo, so even if you end up having to use all 3 Crimson in one turn, it won't impact you much. Besides, how else would you suggest we liven up this performance? Lunalight Yellow Martin is a level 4 monster with 800 attack and 2000 defense, and if this card is in your hand or grave, you can target a Lunalight card you control, except another copy of itself, return that target to the hand, and if you do, special summon this card in defense position, but banish Martin if it leaves the field. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can add a Lunalight spell or trap from your deck to your hand. So this means you can get the Surge after they're used as fusion material, but also when sent by generic means like Foolish Burial. Now, we don't have a lot of targets to search, including a target we really should be able to get, but the ones we can are very, very important. And their revival effect is great for resetting your on-summon effects while maintaining a healthy amount of fusion material, or Xyz material, since once it's used as overlay material, it won't banish itself. Now, to cap this off, I gotta admit, I didn't know what a Martin was before I started this video, so I looked it up and, well, here you go. You're welcome, by the way. Lunalight Emerald Bird is a level 4 monster with 1200 attack and 1000 defense, and if normal or special summoned, you can send a Lunalight card from your hand to the grave, and if you do, you draw a card. And if sent to the grave by a card effect, you can target a level 4 or lower Lunalight monster that's banished or in your grave and special summon it in defense position, but its effects are negated. So when used as fusion material, you can get one of the material monsters back. And since its on-summon effect sends the Lunalight card as an effect, it'll trigger Yellow Martin. So, despite being one of the newer members of the team, Emerald Bird is far from green. Lunalight Kaleido Chick is a level 4 monster with 1400 attack and 800 defense, and once per turn, you can send a Lunalight monster from your deck or extra deck to the grave, and the name of this face-up card on the field is treated as the sent monsters if used as fusion material this turn. And if sent to the grave by a card effect, you can add a polymerization from your grave to your hand. And if banished, you can activate an effect that keeps your opponent's cards and effects from activating during the battle phase that turn. Kaleido Chick is the linchpin of modern Lunalight strategies. You can send Yellow Martin to set up its own special summon effect, though notably not its spell and trap surge since it's sent to the grave as cost. But one of my favorite uses is sending cards from the extra deck to the grave. See, we have a few fusions that work kind of like a synchro climb. They have a specific fusion material that they need, but there are other fusions. So generally, you're fusion summoning one just to get to the next one. But Kaleido-Chick can effectively skip you ahead in that line. And while its first effect has a once per turn clause, it doesn't extend to other copies. So the more Kaleido-Chicks you play in a turn, or bounce the ones you already have, then resummon them, the more times you can activate that effect. And with a fusion effect we'll be getting into later that banishes your material, triggering the battle phase effect freeze is super easy. So next time you're rooting through Master Duel to get some staples, make sure you pick up some chicks. Okay, now it's time to cover our light main deck monsters who just so happen to be pendulum monsters, and the first one has been on people's minds for quite some time. Lunalight Tiger is a level 3 monster with 1200 attack and 800 defense with a pendulum scale of 5. As a pendulum spell, once per turn, you can target a Lunalight monster in your grave and special summon it, but it can't attack, its effects are negated, and it's destroyed during the end phase. As a monster, if destroyed by battle or card effect while on the field, though it does trigger if destroyed in the pendulum scale, you can target a Lunalight monster in your grave and special summon it. This fairly unassuming monster is banned, at least in the TCG. Why? Well, curiously, Tiger's pendulum effect does not have a hard once per turn clause. On the surface, that's still reasonable. Getting an extra material for fusion summons isn't so bad. There's a limit to the ceiling of power for fusions that's set by the kinds of monsters that can be used as fusion material for it. Links, on the other hand, have no such limit. While many do exist that require specific materials, it's far more likely that the barrier to entry is set at the very, very low effect monster scale, which only really serves to lock out tokens. And while Tiger can only reborn once while on the field, a wide infrastructure exists to get around that. Yellow Marten, for instance, is an on-theme way to put a Lunalight card from your field back into your hand. So if you activate Tiger, then bounce it back with Yellow Marten, you can activate Tiger again. What happens if you get Zephyros into the grave? Well, you can use its effect to revive itself, which bounces Tiger again. And if you have an effect that destroys Tiger, you get another grave summon. Then if you have a way to put it back into your hand, you can activate it again. And all of this can be funneled into more and more powerful Link monsters, each giving you more advantage as you add one more rung onto the ladder. Famously, this card was utilized to staggering effect when paired with Orchist, helping to bring about the fabled Orchist combo. Many people have advocated that Tiger can come off the forbidden list, the now forbidden status of Nightmare Mermaid sharply declining the favorability of Orchist, and while the January 2022 ban list is dangerously close to releasing at time of recording, I would say that these hopes are, unfortunately, ill-founded. The structure that allows for this kind of summon looping is still intact. Yellow Marten and Kaleido-Chick are still as playable as ever, so if we're not going to Mermaid, into Nightmare Orchist, into all manner of extenders, it's just going to be another plug-and-play material generator for the game's various and generic Link 4s, at best. Sorry, Lunalight pilots, I know you didn't get a fair shake out of this, trust me, I know your pain, but Tiger is just a catastrophe waiting to happen. And now, it's time for Delilah's Diatribes. Today's subject, format, foibles.
Hey folks, it's Delilah, and these are my diatribes. And you know what? Not having a Lunalight Tiger fucking sucks! We see this all the time where cards are meant for a small, not even rogue archetype gets scooped up by a big meta deck and gets hit on the ban list because of it. Ben 10's now at 1 because of Drytron, Jet Synchron is banned because of Link climbing garbage, and Brilliant Fusion because no one can be satisfied with one normal summon. But I'm actually okay with Brilliant Fusion because it makes a Nova upset. I might not be as pissed if we had some kind of alternative, but Konami hasn't really followed through on implementing any kind of variety. I mean, sure, Duel Links and Speed Duels and Rush Duels exist, but those aren't different ways to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Those are different games that use Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. Trust me, there's a difference. Like, traditional format exists, but Konami has supported like one tournament for it. And despite the incredibly powerful combos and FTKs, it's still the only one that lets you use cards that got unfairly banned. Now, I know that flyer went around a little while ago talking about new formats that official tournament stores can use, but that's all it was. A flyer. And we haven't seen any more details about them. Heart of the Underdog seems close to what we need, a format that bans powerful cards to let lower decks shine, but we don't know anything about the specifics. How exactly do you keep the higher powered archetypes out of play? Will it still use the current ban list, keep you from playing things like Tiger? And will it get any better support than traditional? Basically, Heart of the Underdog is a good start, but we have to go even further until we get at least 2 formats, at least. One that supports the hyper-competitive scene and one more casual, then we're gonna keep having a lot of frustrated players. Because I also think it's unfair for, any high competitive players to get any fuss over, because it's something that they need for their game as well. They need cards like Tiger and Ben 10 banned because that's part of their high competitive play. But it also sucks for the other one. So we need something in the middle. In traditional format, ain't it, Chief? I mean, not the current support it's getting right now.
Lunalight Wolf is a level 6 monster with 2000 attack and 1800 defense with a scale of 1. As a pendulum scale, you can't pendulum summon monsters, except Lunalights, in effect that can't be negated. Once per turn, you can fusion summon a Lunalight fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing material listed on it from your field or grave. And as a monster, it provides piercing damage to all Lunalights. This is pretty useful, as the best way to keep you from closing out the game with your beatdown strategy is to throw as many blockers at your monsters as possible. Wolf has seen this tactic and finds it lacking. But the most important part about them is their pendulum effect, essentially acting as a miracle fusion for your theme. It stacks incredibly well with Kaleido Chick, since not only does the little birdie let you skip ahead in your fusion lineup, Wolf essentially lets you double dip on that, not to mention makes your more cost-effective fusions a little more efficient. Combine that with the possibility of pendulum summoning back Lunalight Tiger, and you've got the makings of a hair-raising battle plan. Alright, we've seen the opening act, now it's time for the main event, our fusion monsters. Like our non-pendulums, they're all dark attribute, and with the exception of our first performer, they must be fusion summoned, and any that list specific material must be fusion summoned with those cards. Though this particular restriction does mean you can get around it with name substitution, though effects like Muddy Mud Dragon won't work since it does not mimic the name. First up is Lunalight Cat Dancer, a level 7 monster with 2400 attack and 2000 defense, requiring any 2 Lunalight monsters as material. Cat Dancer can't be destroyed by battle, and once per turn during your main phase 1, you contribute another Lunalight monster, and for the rest of the turn, the first time each monster your opponent controls would be destroyed by battle, it is not. Also, this card can attack all monsters your opponent controls twice each this turn. And if this card declares an attack, you can burn your opponent for 100 points of damage. This is probably the most convoluted of our effects, but can still hit really hard. Giving your opponent's monsters battle destruction immunity feels really off, but because Cat Dancer then gets the 2 attacks needed to actually take them out, it's effectively a weird way to give double battle damage. In fact, it's even a little more powerful than that, considering that 100 point burn per attack can stack up pretty quickly. And of course, if we look at it thematically, it makes perfect sense, because if there's one thing cats love to do, it's play with their food. Lunalight Panther Dancer is a level 8 monster with 2800 attack and 2500 defense, requiring Cat Dancer and any other Lunalight monster as material, and cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. And once per turn during your main phase 1, you can activate the same effect as Cat Dancer, though you don't have to tribute a Lunalight monster as cost. You also don't burn on every attack, but rather Panther Dancer gains 200 attack for each monster they destroy until the end of that battle phase. So you don't get the upfront damage, but because of Panther's increased stats, it ends up being slightly more damage. And I'd also argue that effect destruction protection is much more useful than battle protection. So they're much better suited at dancing circles around your opponent. Lunalight Leo Dancer is a level 10 monster with 3500 attack and 3000 defense, and can't be targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card effects. They require Panther Dancer and any other 2 Lunalight monsters as material, and they can make an unconditional second attack during each battle phase. And once per turn, at the end of the damage step, if this card attacks a monster, you can destroy all special summon monsters your opponent controls. It doesn't even have to beat the monster it attacked, that's so wild. So if you attack into one of your opponent's normal summoned monsters, and none of their special summoned ones have effect destruction protection, then you've cleared the way for 3500 more points of direct damage. And that's not including any buffs they might have received from cards like Purple Butterfly or Blue Cat. 3500 is exceptional, but having a 7k double attacker is the definition of lethal. Not to mention how hard they can be to interact with. They're completely ruthless, and not just on the battlefield. I hear that Leo Dancer convinced the Forbidden and Limited List committee to axe Broad Bull, but hey, what can you do? Leos and Tauruses be like that sometimes. Our last fusion is also our latest addition, Lunalight Saber Dancer, a level 9 monster with 3000 attack and 2600 defense, requiring 3 Lunalight monsters as material. They gain 200 attack for each beast warrior in the grave or is banished, and your opponent cannot target Saber Dancer with card effects. And during the main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the grave, you can banish Saber Dancer from your grave, then target a fusion monster you control, and it gains 3000 attack until the end of this turn. Good golly, and I thought the Alistair boost was ridiculous. Saber Dancer cranks up the lethality of your Lunalight fusions to 11, as any multi-attacker with 5000 or more attack is primed to finish the game out of nowhere. And since Kaleido Chick can send monsters from the extra deck to the grave as well, it's not that hard to set up, though if you have to summon them, Saber Dancer can get the job done too. Whether you sent their fusion material to the grave or banished it with Wolf, they're gonna hit the field with at least 3600 attack, meaning this Saber's bound to rattle your opponent. Alright, that's all of our monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps, the first of which I'm very frustrated with. Lunalight Perfume, not to be misread as Lunalight Perfume, is a normal spell that targets a Lunalight monster in your grave and special summons it. You can also banish this card from your grave and discard a card to add a Lunalight monster from your deck to your hand. This card is pretty good. Getting a free revival means Kaleido Chick, Yellow Martin, and Blue Cat activations, but because of that little space right here, it's not technically a Lunalight card, so you can't search it with Yellow Martin, and you can't discard it with Emerald Bird to immediately get the grave effect. It is the most frustrating thing, but it's certainly not enough of a pain to leave out of your deck lists, because revival and hand fixing are pretty important for any deck, especially because it lacks any hard once per turn clauses. Oh, and you know, it helps you smell nice. Rulebooks were updated for a reason after all. Lunalight Fusion is a normal spell that fusion summons a Lunalight Fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. And if your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, you can also use a Lunalight monster in your deck or extra deck as fusion material. Now this card is searchable by Yellow Martin, and it's fantastic. In general, it's just a polymerization, but it's got a bit of a Shaddoll fusion twist to it, letting you cheat out some material. And since you can also pull from the extra deck, it has the same kind of ladder skipping ability that Wolf and Kaleido Chick have, letting you go straight into the bombastic ballet brawler, Leo Dancer. You also have the option of sending Yellow Martin from deck to grave, which would end up searching you another Lunalight fusion to set up for next turn. It's the kind of card that really sends the deck's power level to the moon! Nope, can't say that either. God, I hate NFTs. Lunalight Reincarnation Dance is a normal trap that triggers if any number of monsters you control are destroyed by battle or card effect, adding up to 2 Lunalight monsters from your deck to your hand. I mean, in theory this card is nice. It's essentially a searcher that goes even in card economy, whatever monster you lost and the trap itself are 2 Lunalights, but the activation condition isn't very flexible. Being a trap means it's super slow, and if you want to search it, it's gonna be highly telegraphed. The art is admittedly very gorgeous, but I think your efforts to fight evil by moonlight, and maybe even find love by daylight, would be better applied elsewhere. Our last card is Lunalight Serenade Dance, a continuous trap that has an effect which triggers when any number of monsters are fusion summoned to your field, except during the damage step. You target one of those fusion monsters and apply these effects in sequence. 1. You special summon a Lunalight token to your opponent's side of the field, which is a level 4 Dark Beast Warrior with 2000 attack and defense. Then 2. The fusion monster you targeted gains 500 attack for each monster your opponent controls, even if Serenade Dance leaves the field. You can also banish this card from your grave during your main phase, and on resolution you send a card from your hand to the grave, and if you do, special summon a Lunalight monster from your deck. This makes for excellent discard fodder for anything, because it'll translate into a Lunalight on field, and since it discards cards generically, you can even discard Perfume with this. The on-field effect is, I believe, meant to bolster the power of the multi-attack fusions, because even at a base 2000 stat line, that token isn't standing up to any of them. But it's certainly not worth the effort considering all the great attack boosting effects we already have at our disposal. So I'd recommend sending this to the grave as soon as possible, before Tom Hooper decides to pull a Cats and give the entire archetype the CGI treatment. Okay, so that's all the Lunalight cards, but what do we do with them? Well, if the fusions didn't bring it home enough for you, we are on the beatdown. Any kind of interaction this deck has is purely installed to help make our plays more resilient, not to stymie our opponent. So we'll want to add as many good generic hand traps and other pieces of interaction to clear the way for a gigantic Leo Dancer to clean up your opponent's life points. So what can we play to help them out? Well, I'm gonna get the meta answer out of the way really quick so we can rip the band-aid off. The Verte Anaconda package works great here. Branded Fusion isn't going to lock you out of most anything you were looking to do, and because we natively have lights and darks in the deck, splashing in some Albazes means you can go into Albion, into Lubellion, into Mirror Jade without batting an eye, giving you a quick form of interaction on your opponent's turn. And if you send Alba Renatus with their effect, you can even search Lunalight Fusion as well. Or grab Fusion Destiny. Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer is gonna be a part of this format until something is done about that combo, so if you can't beat them, you might as well join them. Heck, it even gives you a way to activate Reincarnation Dance because now you have a quick effect that can destroy your monsters on your own terms. I still wouldn't recommend playing it, but it's there, and if Tiger ever does come off the list, then making Verte is gonna slot into most play sequences you were gonna do anyway. And hey, are those Beast Warrior monsters? Then by Jove, we've got Tri-Brigade synergies. And by synergies, I mean you get another non-targeting banishing effect. The grave linking effects of your Tri-Brigades might conflict with Wolf's Miracle Fusion, but I like to think of it as synergizing very well with Lunalight Fusion, as well as basically every other fusion effect we have. Plus, banishing a whole bunch of monsters for a fusion summon sounds pretty nice with Revolt. As a silly tech pick, well, okay, this is probably the least silly that I've ever committed to in a video. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of Beast Warrior fusion support out there, so before we summon those newfangled Bearer Jace, the Nice Glade Dragon, or Employer Phoenix Fact Sorcerer, we could use 2 level 4s to make Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Tiger King. It grabs you the now limited Tenki for more searches, and can non-targeting negate an opponent's entire board, thus stripping monsters of their protections or forcing out interaction. Either way, your opponent's gonna have a hard time financially recovering from that. And that's all I've got to say about Lunalights. They're a strong fusion strategy that can take games out of nowhere, suffering from the all too common affliction of generic-itis, which has kept Tiger, arguably their best card, in quarantine until they can find a way to reintroduce it without infecting everything. But even without, the deck can make a fine showing on the battlefield as well as the stage, which will always keep your opponent on their toes. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. So I've been going through the backlog of core sets recently, checking to see if there was any errant support for themes long past, when finally, something crossed my eye that I had let languish among a sea of S-Force and Springans. Amongst the discourse about prosperity and war rocks, we got an update to an archetype from Arc V that hasn't really had a chance to stand on its own yet. But with a little help from legacy support, that may no longer be the case. Debuting in the February 2017 core set Raging Tempest, Windwitch is our theme piloted by Rin, which makes this the final video about the, and once again, spoilers for Arc V, reincarnations of Rei Akaba, this time their Synchro Dimension counterpart. It's also one in a long line of themes Konami has made that asks the question, how good can we make a theme so long as it locks you into only using wind monsters? Certainly, there are powerful individual wind monsters, usually centered in synchros, but once your main deck has to be built around it, that's where problems start to form, as they usually specialize in being as antithetical to the meta as possible. Both the Osenjus and the half-wind themed Floanderies focus on normal summoning multiple times, and don't exactly play well with others. Mist Valley has you bouncing your own cards back to hand, with only very few actually clearing the bar of playability, and Battle Wasps will just as soon lock you into Insects, which has its own swarm of problems. And today's offering is no different. So let's see what mischief these witches can conjure up, find out which way their wind blows, then see if there are any companion themes that want to chime in. It's time to seize the wind with, no, that's the wrong series. It's time to blow our opponents away with Wind Witches. So what's the deal with Wind Witches? Well, they're a series of wind attribute spellcaster type monsters that focus heavily on synchro summoning. They also served as Trickstar's inspiration to look at the fire attribute and go, Hey, you know what? They aren't the only attribute that can burn things. That's right, we have a synchro burn strategy. Everything it feels like Laval should have been. Now, Windwitch is actually released with a very small core of monsters. So let's start with their initial cards in the order their combo would usually go, and then we'll cover their new additions and what they add to the table. First, we have Windwitch Icebell, a level 3 monster with 1000 attack and defense, and if you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then you can special summon a Windwitch monster from your deck, but it cannot be tributed. You also can't special summon monsters from your extra deck the turn you activate this effect, except level 5 or higher wind monsters. And if this card is normal or special summoned, you burn your opponent for 500 points of damage just to get the effect damage rolling. You definitely want to see this in your opening hand each game, because this is an easy one-card synchro summon, and the effect gets better the more Wind Witches you have access to special summoning. And remember, the summon restriction only applies if you use the special summoning effect, so if they're summoned any other way, you can burn your opponent with Wild Abandon. It'll also make your opponent very cautious about their remaining life total, because while this card is in rotation and they get at or below 500, they'll be on Thin Ice. Now at the time, the summon of choice for its first effect was Windwitch Glassbell, a level 4 tuner monster with 1500 attack and defense, and if they're normal or special summoned, you can add a Windwitch monster from your deck to your hand, except a copy of itself. Also, you can't special summon monsters for the rest of the turn, except wind monsters. So where Icebell was kind of a hero lives, Glassbell is the Stratos, tutoring up any other on-theme monster while being a pretty good tuner. The wind restriction is a bit of a bummer, but if you summoned Glassbell with Icebell's effect, you're already pretty much locked into wind anyway, and throwing stones in glass houses isn't really helpful. Besides, the card you'd get out of all of this more than makes up for it. Windwitch Snowbell, a level 1 tuner monster with 100 attack and defense, and if you control 2 or more wind monsters and no non-wind monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. And a wind synchro monster that was synchro summoned using this card as synchro material cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. I see they learned a thing or two from the Yang Zing, and honestly, I'm so here for it. Material monsters that grant extra bonuses that don't interact with things like negation are absolutely wild, and recontextualize how effective those boss monsters can be. And if those material are easy to throw onto the field, then all the better. There's not a Snowbell's chance in hell I'm missing out on that. Now, with your Ice, Glass, and Snowbells all assembled on the field, you sink Ice and Glass into Windwitch Winterbell, a level 7 synchro monster with 2400 attack and 2000 defense, requiring a tuner and a non-tuner wind monster as material. It can target a Windwitch monster in your grave and burn your opponent for 200 damage times that monster's level, and during the battle phase, as a quick effect, you can target a Windwitch monster you control to special summon a monster from your hand with a level less than or equal to that monster, but it cannot attack this turn. So before doing anything else, you can have Winterbell target the Glassbell you used as material to burn for an extra 800 damage. And while we normally proceed to climb another rung in our synchro ladder immediately, the battle phase effect is actually kinda cool, because it just summons another monster. Well, okay, any level 7 or lower monster. Okay, any level 7 or lower wind monster if we're caught under Glassbell's effect, but you're probably only running winds in this deck anyway. That means a free Apex Avian negate, you cannot pass that up. So those were the 4 core cards in Windwitch. At that point, you'd have Winterbell and Snowbell, and you'd tune them together to make a Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon that was a lot harder to out now that it couldn't be destroyed by card effects. And it already wasn't easy to out in battle either. But lest you think we're at the end of the pre-Blazing Vortex section, much like Lyrliusc, this non-fusion archetype was saddled with a fusion thanks to Academia. Meet Windwitch Crystalbell, a level 8 fusion monster with 2800 attack and 2400 defense, requiring Windwitch Winterbell and any Windwitch monster as material. It can target a monster in either player's grave, and until the end phase, this card's name becomes that target's original name, and replace this effect with that target's original effect. Uh-oh, watch out, they banned Supreme King Starving Venom for effects like that. And if this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to the grave, you can target a Windwitch Winterbell and a level 4 or lower Windwitch monster in your grave and special summon them. Now, how do you summon a fusion monster in a deck like this? Well, as was a recurring plot point among the Zuzu lookalikes, they had access to a monster called Fusion Parasite, which can perform a fusion summon on special summon and could act as any named material that you'd like. This is probably why Winterbell has the special summon effect, so you could attack with it, then summon the Fusion Parasite, getting you another attack in the battle phase after you fusion summoned. And I've gotta say, this was implemented much better here than it was in Lyrliusc. And, to top it all off, it effectively defusions on contact with destruction, though you can't get back the Fusion Parasite, so that's lovely. At that point, you can summon back Snowbell to sync with a level 8 like usual, or Icebell to deal some extra burn damage, or Glassbell to make level 11 synchros. If this triggers on your opponent's turn, then you can use the Search with Impunity, then make Psychic End Punisher on your turn, which makes for an incredible game ender. And if this does trigger on your turn, then you still have access to High Speed Roid Clear Wing Rider, which can really put in some work. Recycling, and destruction, and an attack boost? Gosh, Rin and Yugioh's cards really do go well together. But I guess that goes to show just how in sync they are. So that's where Windwitch was at time of release, but if you look at the individual effects, you can start to see a problem. The sequence of events where Ice special summons itself in Glass, searches you Snow, which you then special summon because you now have 2 winds, only works in that specific circumstance. There's no other play sequence that gets you there, barring some other outside circumstances. Sure, you can normal summon Glass and get the search, but neither of your choices are very relevant. Icebell can't go anywhere because you now control a monster, and neither can Snowbell because you only control 1 monster and not 2. Either you draw into Ice, or you don't get to play. That is where the new support comes in. Let's take a look at how it patched things up. Windwitch Freezebell is a level 3 monster with 1200 attack and defense, and if all monsters you control are Windwitches, minimum 1, you can special summon this card from your hand. And once per turn, during your main phase, you can increase this card's level by 1. And a Wind Synchro monster that was Synchro summoned using this card as Synchro material cannot be destroyed by battle. Already, we're seeing some major improvements, because now, Glassbell can be a starter card. While it's not as flashy without having Snowbell, Freezebell can special summon themselves once searched alongside Glassbell to make Winterbell. Heck, if you have Glassbell in hand and either Snow or Freeze, you can search the other and it's like you never even needed the Icebell. But that's not fair because all of this also enhances Icebell. If you start with the Ice and Glass special summon combo, but you search Freeze instead of Snow, you can special summon Freeze and you'll have a total of 10 levels. That makes a Barone that can't be destroyed by battle. And that's all just using Freezebell's base level. With their level modulation, you can also access level 8 synchros with Glassbell, the most popular of which being Stardust Dragon. And being able to resist battle destruction is going to make its effect destruction negation a lot more reliable, as your opponent will no longer be able to make a bigger monster to knock your plans out cold. We also got Windwitch Blizzardbell, a level 5 tuner monster with 1800 attack and defense, and if you control no monsters, or all monsters you control are Windwitch monsters, you can normal summon this card without tributing. And during your opponent's main phase, if you control a Windwitch other than Blizzardbell, you can send this card from your hand or field to the grave to burn your opponent for 500 damage. Now, that second effect will become more relevant in a bit, but for now, what does having a level 5 tuner do for us? Well, if you summon it off of Icebell, you can immediately go into a level 8 Wind Synchro. Notably, by skipping past Glassbell, you no longer put yourself under a total wind lock just from your extra. So if you have some kind of main deck theme you want to splash in, this is a good way to do it. Alternatively, this pairs well with Freezebell as you normal summon Blizzard, special summon Freeze now that you have a Windwitch, and now you can go into any generic level 8 Synchro since you didn't put yourself under any kind of lock. Or any generic level 9 if you have Freeze modulate their own level. And I hear level 9 Synchros are pretty in vogue these days. Just be ready to deal with the 70% accuracy. It's not as reliable as Windwitch Ice Beam Bell, but it does a heck of a lot more damage. And speaking of accessing level 8 Synchros, we've also got our new boss monster, Windwitch Diamond Bell, which appears to be the non-fusion parasite corrupted version of Crystal Bell. They have 2800 attack and 2400 defense, and requires a tuner and 1 or more non-tuner wind monsters as material. If this card is synchro summoned, you can target a Windwitch monster in your grave and inflict damage to your opponent equal to half its attack. And once per turn, if your opponent takes any battle or effect damage, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. And if you control this card that was synchro summoned using only Windwitch monsters as material, you can use this effect twice per turn. So when summoned, you'll get the pop immediately because of its on-summon burn effect, and if you have another source of burn and are playing pure Windwitch, you get even more removal. You can trigger it off of things like Ice Bell or Winter Bell, or you can play completely off theme burn like Meteor of Destruction or Cauldron of the Old Man. You might also want to consider some quick effect burn to trigger this card on your opponent's turn. This is where Blizzard Bell's quick effect comes in, being able to burn for 500 at any time as long as you control Diamond Bell. But if you want even more cards to trigger this effect, then unironically, Secret Barrel, Ceasefire, and Just Desserts are removal in this deck. How could you not love that? And on top of getting new monsters, we actually have honest-to-goodness spell and trap support. Windwitch Chimes is a normal spell that targets a Windwitch monster you control and special summons a Windwitch monster with a different name from your deck in defense position, and you can't special summon monsters the turn you activate this card except wind monsters. Now, this does apply to the whole turn before and after, unlike Glass Bell, so if you're using this card, make sure you aren't being fancy and trying to splash in non-wins when incorporating this card into your deck. But the restriction is well worth it, as it's a one-card problem solver to put together any field that you need to access the synchros you want, especially because it doesn't negate the summoned monster's effects, so Glass Bell can still net you a search. And since, by default, you'll have 2 Wind Witches on resolution, I assume Snow Bell is going to be a pretty popular choice. I mean, Can't Be Destroyed by Card Effect has a nice ring to it. Our last card is Icy Breeze Refrain, a normal trap card that can activate one of 2 effects. You can target a Windwitch monster in your grave and special summon it in defense position, or when your opponent activates a card or effect in response to your Windwitch monster's effect activation, you negate that opponent's effect. So it's a revival effect in general, great for summoning out Ice Bell at a moment's notice to get in some quick burn damage, and thus triggering Diamond Bell, but it can also be a way to insulate your plays, hitting hand traps and non-counter trap negation. Kinda hoping there'd be destruction tacked onto that negation, but you've heard me complain about that song and dance before, and I doubt you'd all want to sit through that refrain again. Okay, so that's all our Windwitch cards, but what do we do with them? Well, I'm of the opinion that we should just sit around, do nothing, and let our burn effects work for us. While our bosses do boast some impressive stats, we're more about using them to close out the game after we've softened them up with a little broiling. So we'll want to lock our opponent down as much as possible, sapping them of life points until they're just dust in the wind. So what can we play to help them out? Well, as a mono-attribute, mono-type deck, both Gozen Match and Rivalry of Warlords make for some fitting floodgates. One of the first themes that ever splashed with Wind Witches was Invoked. Even under Ice Bell's restriction, you could still normal summon Alistair, get the invocation, and banish a spent Wind Witch to make Raijin. And having a Book of Moon on legs ain't nothing. And because the Wind Lock was only activated by a few monsters, and in the case of Glass Bell only applied after their effect was used, you could use Alistair on subsequent turns, banishing hand traps from both players to access the rest of your arsenal, namely Mechaba for those sweet negates. If you want to turbo out a lot of Wind Witches in your hand, give Summon Storm a try. For the low cost of 800 life points, all of your Wind Witches can be special summoned from the hand, and when in grave you can do it for free, though you won't be able to special summon Blizzard Bell. Wonders of Nature is here to help you turbo out your Wind Witches as well, while having the bonus of bouncing all dragons on the field when it resolves, so your opponent's in for a nasty surprise if they're on Dragon Link. And getting the Fusion or Poly Search is another way to streamline the process of getting Crystal Bell on board. As for a silly tech pick, how about asking for a little help from our spellbook companions? While being under the Wind Lock means we'll have a hard time accessing High Priestess, nothing's stopping us from using Blue Boy on most turns, cause, like Alistair showed us, the normal summon is pretty open in this deck. Spellbook Magician can search us more spellbook cards, including Power to help get over things or finish games, Fate as Interruption, or a field spell that will draw us an extra card each turn. And we do love drawn cards. And that's all I have to say about Wind Witches. It's a scrappy little theme looking to bypass the normal means of dueling by letting the effect damage do the talking. Practice shaving down your opponent's life points before going in for the kill, and you'll find that taking down your opponent is a breeze. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Last episode we talked about Fleur, an archetype that recently got support in Synchro Storm, and while it dips into the fusion pools elsewhere, was still in service to the Synchro mechanic. But today's subject, Lyrliusc, is definitely in the wrong department. See, Lyrliusc was piloted in the Arc V anime by Lulu Obsidian, sister of Good Revolution boy Shay Obsidian, and that means... spoilers for fairly important Arc V plot points coming up, she's from the Xyz dimension. You know, a reality that's decidedly not synchro. And this is in a story where they're the second person to have multiple reincarnations across different extra deck themed universes, and you didn't pick the one that matches the theme of the pack you put together. They even have Wind Witches. Wind Witches, why do you fail me so? But I've got to cover the set we have, not the set I want. While previously an archetype that piqued interest but little else, Lyrliusc have had something of a renaissance recently with the release of Tri-Brigade, and that was even before the Synchro Storm support was announced. Turns out the theme that uses yarded tri-types as material for big summons likes the deck that throws a bunch of material under an Xyz monster, cause they're all going to the grave eventually. So, to get a better understanding of these rising starlings in the competitive community, let's review the roost to see who's ready to fly, study their migration patterns to find out where they're going, then see if we can add any friends to their fearsome flock. It's time to find out how to be number one with Lyrliusc. So what's the deal with Lyrliuscs? Well, they're a series of level 1 or rank 1 wind attribute winged beast type monsters that look like harpy ladies by way of black wings. Like, are they bird people? Are they people in bird suits? You know, if Dino Rufia and Insector have taught us anything, it's that you can be whatever type feels right. As far as gimmicks go, the theme is actually pretty standard for Xyz decks. The main deck monsters focus on assembling as much material as possible, several of which grant effects to the Xyz monsters you make, while your bosses are all about slowly chipping away at your opponent while keeping your field secure and your opponents troubled. Let's start with Turquoise Warbler. They have 100 attack and defense, and if you control no monsters, you can special summon them from your hand. And if special summoned from your hand by any means, including its own, you can special summon a Lyrliusc monster from your hand or grave. This is a great starter because not only can it help swarm monsters out of your hand in the early game, but also helps you recover another Lyrliusc in the late game. It's like the old saying goes, birds of a feather accrue massive amounts of card advantage that can be used to crush your opponent with together. Lyrliusc Cobalt Sparrow is a pretty neat monster to pair with them. They have 0 attack and 100 defense, and if special summoned, you can add a level 1 winged beast monster from your deck to your hand. And a Wind Xyz monster that was summoned using this card on the field as material gains an effect that keeps your opponent from targeting it with card effects. So not only are we keeping our Xyz safe from the likes of Imperms and Dogmatica punishments, we're also getting another Lyrliusc from our deck to our hand. Or any other level 1 winged beast. Grab DD Crow for some grave hate, get Slower Swallow for an extra draw next turn, or as more Xyz material, or Nerval for the Tri-Brigade synergies. So when it comes to making your Xyz monsters, Cobalt makes for a good co-host. Lyrliusc Sapphire Swallow has 100 attack and 0 defense, and if you control a winged beast monster, you can special summon both this card and a level 1 winged beast from your hand. And a Wind Xyz monster that's summoned using Sapphire Swallow on the field as material gains an effect that triggers on Xyz Summon, which targets a Lyrliusc monster in your grave and attaches it to that Xyz monster as material. This is another good enabler for Cobalt Sparrow, and while it doesn't have any immediate effect on the board state, it does make your Xyz monsters even more terrifying. While it's always been nice to have more material on your Xyz monsters so they can keep using their effects, Lyrliuscs in particular have a number of effects that care about the number of Xyz material they have. They're already pretty good, but with this card, they're gonna be Sapphire. Lyrliusc Barrel Canary has 0 attack and 200 defense, and if they're in your hand, you can target a Lyrliusc monster in your grave to special summon Canary and the targeted monster, but you can't special summon monsters from your extra deck for the rest of the turn except Xyz monsters. Darn, and we went so long without restricting the extra deck too. Oh well. If used as Xyz material for a wind monster while on the field, that Xyz monster gains an effect that boosts its own attack by 200, and also possession of it can't switch. That's an oddly specific effect to have, but it's better than nothing, especially if our opponent gets it in their head to play something like Triple Tactics Talent. Even the 200 attack boost, which would be paltry in any other strategy, is superb in ours, given one of the Xyz monsters we'll be talking about later. At first, it might seem like the effect has us over the barrel, but you can turn things around with a little canary-do attitude. Lyrliusc Celestine Wagtail has 200 attack and 0 defense, and if special summoned, you can add a Lyrliusc spell or trap from your deck to your hand, and boy, howdy do we have some fresh ones. Also, while in the grave, you can target a Lyrliusc Xyz monster you control and attach Wagtail to it as material. Another great monster to pair with Warbler, Swallow, and Canary. We can use this effect to grab a search card, a combat trick, or an on-theme Dark Ruler no more. And because nothing banishes Wagtail after using its second effect, you can keep equipping it to your Xyz monsters over and over again, which ain't anything to wag your finger at. That makes up our supporting cast, but before we move on to the core of our theme, we need to take a slight detour to Fusion Zone. Yeah, they've got that too, but not a synchro. I'm not mad. I've decided I am not mad. Lyrliusc Independent Nightingale has 1000 attack and 0 defense, requiring Assembled Nightingale, who we'll get into in a bit, as well as any Lyrliusc monster. If fusion summoned using an Xyz monster on the field whose original name included Lyrliusc, you can increase this card's level by the number of Xyz material those monsters had on the field. So if you use 2 Xyz monsters, you can check both monsters' materials. Independent Nightingale gains 500 attack times its level, is unaffected by other cards' effects, and once per turn, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to this card's level times 500. This seems wildly out of place. And it is, but that's because it has some anime significance. More spoilers coming up. Something called fusion parasites were being used to control the Rei Akiba reincarnations, and they're added to their decks, which ends up giving them a fusion monster per their controller's affiliation. But in Paper Yu-Gi-Oh!, are we ever going to use it? Well, maybe. I mean, not for nothing, but you can do some serious damage with this effect, easily getting at least 2k. But unfortunately, with Barrel Canary locking out our non-Xyz summons from the extra deck, you could say that your ability to summon Nightingale is quite dependent on if you use Canary. Okay, time to get back on track. Let's talk about our Xyz monsters. They're all rank 1, require 2 or more level 1 monsters as material, and have 0 attack and defense. Lyrliusc Assembled Nightingale gains 200 attack for each Xyz material attached to it, can attack directly, and while attached with material, can attack a number of times each turn up to the number of materials attached to them. And if that wasn't enough, once per turn as a quick effect, you can detach a material, and until the end of the turn, all Lyrliusc monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect, and you take no battle damage. Holy smokes, that can get out of hand really quickly. Sure, only 2 material means 800, but 3 makes 1800, 4 makes 3200, and 5 means 5000. Get it up to 7, and that's an OTK. Eat your heart out, Ghost Trick Angel of Mischief. Sure, that's more material than you can actually put on board at once, but between all these Swallow and Wagtail effects adding more material after the summon, Barrel essentially acting as 2 material with their attack boost, and some of the most comprehensive protection I've seen given to a field of monsters, and you've got a card that's really good at assembling lethal. Lyrliusc Recital Starling has an effect when Xyz summoned, where you can target a face-up monster on the field, and it gains a permanent 300 attack and defense boost for each material attached to Starling. And once per turn, they can detach a material to add a level 1 winged beast monster from your deck to your hand. And all battle damage you take in battles involving this Xyz summoned card is also inflicted to your opponent. What is going on with their effects? They're so good! Okay, let me break it down. If you manage to make Starling after Nightingale, you can give their on-summon attack bonus to our multi-attacking direct attacker, thus lowering the amount of materials needed to reach their critical OTK threshold, acts as another Lyrliusc Searcher to help extend your combos, and if Nightingale somehow doesn't do enough damage, you can crash Starling into an opponent's monster to try and clear out the rest of their life points. Nightingale may not be the brawn, but this monster here really is the star of the show. Lyrliusc Promenade Thrush gains 500 attack for each material attached to it, and once per turn, you can detach a material to target a spell or trap your opponent controls and shuffle it into their deck. And at the start of the damage step, if another monster you control battles, you can detach any number of materials from Thrush to have that monster you control gain 300 attack for each material detached until the end of the turn. Important wording there, because since it lasts until the end of the turn, it can also help to multiply the power of Nightingale. It's probably the least bombastic of the crew, but it is back row removal in the extra deck or face-up cards that have made themselves more prominent. Lyrliusc Ensemble Robin gains 500 attack for each material attached to it, and if your opponent special summons any number of monsters except during the damage step, you can detach a material to target one of those monsters and return it to the hand. And that's not a once per turn effect, so as long as you have material to feed it, you can keep bouncing. Also, if this card in your possession is sent to the grave by an opponent's card, you can target another Lyrliusc monster in your grave and add it to your hand. This is one of the biggest advancements in the archetype. Until now, Lyrliusc players going first had to make do with a copy of Kikinagashi Fucho to hold down the fort. But now you can actually interrupt your opponent right where it hurts, the special summons. They aren't going to be winning any games for you by taking away your opponent's life points, but like many things in life, teamwork is the key, and there's no better way to get there than by this ensemble performance. But if that wasn't enough, we've got some excellent support cards that'll help us fly to even greater heights. Lyrliusc Bird Call is a normal spell that takes a Lyrliusc monster from your deck, and you can either add it to your hand or send it to the grave. Then you can special summon a Lyrliusc monster with a different name from your hand. I'm sorry, what? Okay, yeah, sure. Just do everything, why don't you? The full power of this card is going to depend on whatever Lyrliusc you already have in hand, since you can't use whichever one you searched. But this radically increases the power of Sparrow, since you don't need to worry about having the right monster to pair with it to get their special summon, and you can use it on Warbler to get their effect, even if you have monsters on board. Even sending that monster to the grave is a viable option, because it sets them up to be summoned by Canary, or sets up Wagtail to be attached to one of your Xyz monsters. Yeah, I'm calling it now. This deck is busted. Lyrliusc Bird Strike is a normal spell that you can activate if you control a Lyrliusc monster, and it negates the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls until the end of the turn. Okay, so calling it a Dark Ruler no more was a bit much since it can be responded to, but not by much. And in this case, you get to do all the battle damage you normally would have been able to. And it's searchable by Wagtail. Why is no one talking about this? Oh, because it's not gonna come out until the Animation Chronicle cards get imported. Right. This is awkward. Yeah, I moved to strike this from the record. I don't want anyone saying that. Lyrliusc Bird Sanctuary is a continuous spell that lets you target 2 winged beast Xyz monsters you control and attach one of them to the other as material, and it transfers over all the material the attached one had as well. Holy cow! At that point, you don't even have to crash into anything with Starling. You can just tuck him under Nightingale and go to town. Looks like getting to that critical OTK amount isn't going to be that hard. Also, if you control any Xyz monster with 3 or more material, you can draw a card. Yeah, just add a cantrip effect to it. That'll draw you even more cards if it sticks around long enough to get the effect again. Or rather, if you let your opponent live that long. Sorry folks, you may not like it, but this is what Beak Performance looks like. Our last card is Lyrliusc Phantom Feathers, a normal trap that has you targeting a Lyrliusc monster you control. On resolution, all monsters your opponent currently control have their attack permanently changed to match the Lyrliusc you targeted, as well as changing their levels and ranks to 1. And when an opponent's monster declares an attack on one of your Lyrliusc monsters, you can banish Phantom Feathers from your grave, and the monster targeted for that attack has their attack stat changed to match that opponent's monsters until the end of the turn, which is super fortunate if you have Nightingale on board to make it so you can't be destroyed by battle. This one's probably the most gimmicky one of the bunch, but I've got to admit, the idea of zeroing out your opponent's field by targeting Barrel Canary is immensely funny, even if its utility isn't entirely on the level. Okay, so that's all the Lyrliusc cards, but what do we do with them? Well, on paper, we'll OTK our opponent by smashing them with Nightingale as many times as we need to. But we've got a whole choir of options to choose from, so we aren't going to be so one-note. With the help of supplemental cards, as well as some of our own, I'm looking at you, Ensemble, we can actually stun our opponent as well, keeping them on the back foot long enough to bring that one-turn kill together. But what can we play to help them out? Lyrliusc are poised to take advantage of some of the Xyz pool's best cards. Sure, you could use Sanctuary to make an absolutely towering Nightingale, but you could also fold those rank 1s into Utopic Future, which can then become Utopic Dragon Future. Negating monster effects and stealing them is silly, but if you need some interruption after going second, then you can make an absolutely demoralizing AA Zeus. Like Borbo before it, Nightingale just doesn't care about your opponent's monster lineup, so you carve out a ton of damage, stack even more material onto it with Sanctuary if you want, then stack Zeus on top of all that, and dare your opponent to commit to a board. Getting at least 2 activations will be easy, with the possibility of 3 or even 4 not being too outlandish. For more ways to smooth out your plays, you can use Jester Confit as a free level 1 to get things going if you're short just a single monster, where Arfthou comes with a hefty life point penalty, but it'll be worth it to unleash your full power. And Link Haribo can be made before you lock out links with Barrel Canary, that way Ensemble can't just get run over by a normal summon. As for a silly tech pick, Instant Fusion. It's got the same utility as Jester Confit, and we'll be using it to summon Independent Nightingale, as it doesn't have any kind of restriction that keeps you from doing so. It doesn't do much more than Jester, but it does dome your opponent for an extra 500 damage, which is pretty nice. And that's all I've got to say about Lyrliusc. We're in for a heck of a format where people can stack tiny birds on top of each other to pilot giant robots with an unreasonable amount of consistency, and honestly, I'm here for it. They're fast, they're furious, and are ready to bring the smack down. Hello everyone! If you've made it this far, first up, a big thank you for watching all the way through the video, and second, I'm not really going to have a better opportunity to cover this card. It's one that ties in all the girls of the Boyo Brigade, Kaiyo Reigetsu, an equip spell card that has you special summoning a level 4 or lower fairy, spellcaster, winged beast or beast warrior monster from your hand, and if you do, equip it with this card. Then you can return all dragon monsters on the field to their owner's hands. During the end phase, if this card is in the grave because it was sent there from the spell and trap zone this turn while face up, you can add a polymerization spell, or fusion parasite from your deck to your hand. Alright, there is a lot to unpack here. The card is chock full of references to Zuzu, Selena, Lulu, and Rin. It shows off their iconic dimensional bracelets, and they're even in the same pose as what they strike in the fourth ending theme of Arc V, called Speaking. The types of monsters it can special summon all line up with the archetypes used by the various Boyles, while the dragon bouncing effect references how said bracelets were used to banish Zark, causing the split in dimensions that would be the backdrop for the entire series. Even the search effect covers all the fusion spells used by the girls. Even Rin and Lulu, who used Synchro and Xyz respectively, have fusion monsters for their archetypes, though to be fair, were usually the result of Academia's fusion parasite, which is why that's been added to the list. This card is chock full of effects, and I'm sure at some point this is going to find a use in a format where summoning one of these types is important, as well as being able to fuse with those cards, on top of needing to get rid of a bunch of dragons. Heck, I could see this getting some utility in Branded since it can summon all of our spellcasters as well as Aluber, maybe even the odd Mercurier if need be. It'll take some getting used to if you want to make the most of it, but here's a tip. It's all in the wrist. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the lovely people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. Today's episode is also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commanders, Simic Toadstool and Upstairs Media, Nebula Navigators 3rd Dynasty, 50 Gigabytes, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Owexitowa Yume, Anansi Dragon, Ancient Wizard, Andrew Newman, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Comrade Copperbottom, Emony Chan, Eric, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Groog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Carp, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Picata, Megacombi, Millennia Asta, Mern, Nathan Vig, Natiel Lee Alexander, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, RL Man, Sammy Haim, Scott 48, Serenity Towns, Skybuster Leo, The Phantom Knights of Shitted Pants, The Critic of Innocence, Thievery Coast and the Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders, A Random Pup, Ariel Kersey, Baden Von Titty Sprinkles, Beelsifer, Burnag, Blitzwolf, Borger with a Shotgun, Chaz Ghost, Childish Lamar, Dr. Reaper, R.I.P., Drachenwald, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Ignis Heat the True Draco Slayer, Inblink, Jester Designs, Kale the Dragon, Kevon Public, Lemon Yugioh, Lobomaru 02, Manga Pages, Matt Simmons, McSpoofy, Michael Shimabukuro, Michael Sharp, Nitromo, Nyx, Obsidian, Ryan Simon, Shizuka Nijimura, Sophie, apparently, Stephen Williamson, Taylor Seymour, Terror Top to 3, The Legendary Raven, The Pokemon 52, Tiger X2476, Visor KG, Zaldreka and Zalus, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, and be a part of these credits, along with other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you would check out the link to my Patreon in the description, or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to binge even more videos, check out this supercut where I cover all the lore from the first part of the Dual Terminal story. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.